With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live.
The day's big talking points down to their bare bones and devour the red meat of pure debate as we focus on the stories that matter to you wherever you're listening or watching from around the world. Today we'll discuss the increased lawlessness and a memo to decrease arrests to save prison space, accusations of anti-Semitism in pro-Gaza protests, and whether climate protests such as those run by Just Stop Oil should be banned. And you can call us. It's so important that you do get in touch. I'd love to hear your voices. And here's how you can do it.
Our lines are open. From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Well, if you have any thoughts on the topics we talk about today, or even if you just want to raise anything completely different, do get in touch. People will say they've got no platforms to air their views. Well, that's not right. You've got your platform here. Do give us a call on those numbers. Well, today, the Muckrakers, not just me, Andrew Eborn, but I'm joined yet again by two fantastic guests, joined by the writer and journalist, my good friend Emma Wolfe, and former Labour official, new friend Richard Power Said. Well, as well as being an author in her own right, Emma is also the great niece of the literary legend Virginia Woolf, who's a famous writer and founder of the Bloomsbury Group. And we were saying just before we came on air, you have a little secret about Virginia you'd like to share.
There are many things I can tell you about Virginia Woolf. My father, Andrew, who died in his 90s quite recently, was the last man who actually knew and met and spent time with his uncle and aunt Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf, of course. Leonard was a great Labour Party activist, founding member of the Fabian Society. Virginia, often thought of as a cold, unfeeling, rather stern woman, was actually incredibly warm, used to go on little adventures with my father when he was a child. She used to crawl into the grottos and, make up fairies and butterflies and all sorts. So she was a wonderful, warm woman. And Virginia and Leonard are both just fantastic people.
Fantastic. And Richard, you say you don't normally speak about your family, but you're going to give us a snippet, a bit of context for today's discussion.
Well, I've got a lot. I've got the Irish family, that's Power. I've got the Indian family, that's Saeed. And then I've also got my Jewish family, which sadly I don't have the name from, but my grandma lived on the kibbutzim in Israel for a while, and they lived in Jerusalem as well, actually. So might talk about her a little bit later if the topic of the Middle East conflict comes up.
I'll be surprised if it doesn't. Well, it's a joy to have both of you on as my very special guests. And as I say, I do want to hear from people. Do get in touch. Your views do matter. Lots to get through today. Police have been urged to consider making fewer arrests. Well, police in the UK are being instructed to consider making fewer arrests because of the lack of space in prisons. A letter from the National Police Chiefs Council, the NPCC, circulated last week, urges chief constables to think about pausing so-called non-priority arrests. It also suggests halting planned operations where a large number of arrests could take place to ease the pressure within the criminal justice system. Well, this comes as court cases are being delayed and some prisoners are being released early due to overcrowding in prisons. Well, Emma, should crimes go ignored just to save space in prisons?
Absolutely not. We've known about the overcrowded prisons issue for a long time now. But already, Andrew, in this country, low-level crime is effectively not being policed. In the UK, our streets are lawless. Our communities are cop-free zones. You don't see bobbies on the beat anymore. Things like burglaries, that they're not being pursued. Things like shoplifting is not being pursued. Burglaries, after a burglary in someone's home, you have a golden hour. You have a golden hour. The police need to attend. They need to find out what's happened. They need to collect evidence from the scene of the crime. You need to go and you need to reassure victims that the idea now that we're going to deal with the issue of overcrowding by basically not putting people in prison if it's low-level offences, it's absolutely shocking. What we need in this country, and I've been saying this for so long, what we need is rehabilitation of prisoners. We need to address, first of all, why people are offending. Why are they offending? And then what do you do with them if they do end up in prison? Otherwise, you have more people that we're shoving into prisons, and you have people coming out and re-offending. So yes, our prisons are groaning at the seams. The UK has a very, very Victorian system. We have a very old prison estate. We have terrible crumbling buildings, all of that. The point is we need rehabilitation, we need education and training for prisoners who are banged up so that they come out and they can be citizens, members of society.
No, absolutely. Richard, what are your views?
Well, I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm afraid I'm going to agree with Emma very much here.
Oh, we don't
actually.
want agreement. The last thing we want.
I'll try to find something to create some disagreement with. But it is so clear, right, that when people get shoved into a prison and we just lock them up, okay, for the time that they're in that prison and we're spending loads of money having them in there, then yeah, sure. We're stopping them from committing crimes, or rather, we're stopping them from committing crimes on the street. It's very normal, of course, for people who are in prison to carry on committing crime in the prison. Either that's taking drugs or it's violence against other inmates. And then, of course, once they've done their time, then you let them out and they're just as dangerous or difficult as they used to be before. You need to be giving them mental health support is a very necessary thing. You need to be giving them skills so that they can go back into a new non-criminal job when they get out. You need to be helping them build up new support networks, because one of the really big problems is that often criminals will have kind of no mates other than other people who are committing crime. And so when they go out, they immediately reconnect with those people. At the moment, we're doing locking them up stuff, but we're not doing the rest of it. And quite frankly, the locking them up stuff doesn't really help.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's the whole idea of the prison side. It's not just about the punishment, but also about the rehabilitation and to protect the public. I'm pleased that the lines are already steaming hot with people wanting to get through. I think we're going to go to line number 1. Who's there?
Andrew?
Somebody told me this. Yes, can you hear me? Who's that?
Andrew, it's Paul Gordon.
Oh, hello, Paul. How are you? Thank you very much for joining us. What do you think about the police letting people out early because the prisons are overcrowded?
Well, it seems absolutely crazy. I suppose you might as well write to all the criminals out there asking them not to do any crimes. It's an interesting. What do you think the solution is, though? Because obviously we don't have enough space. That's the problem, and we've got too many criminals and too little space to keep them locked up in. What do you reckon? Well, unfortunately, it's obviously going to get worse because of the lack of discipline in the house or schools, and you can't tell kids off, you can't discipline them in certain ways, and so probably in 10, 20 years' time. It's a bit gloomy, but it'll presumably get worse. So I don't know what the solution is, but it's certainly not letting people out and not building more prisons.
No, you're right. I mean, if you basically have to tackle the individual crimes and work out what are the causes of crimes. Paul, whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Sussex, in England.
Oh, I've heard of that. Be lovely when it's finished. I love Sussex. It's good. Thank you very much for calling in. I know we've got some other callers on the line. Let me take one more call and I'll get back to our panel. Who have we got on the line?
Okay.
Marcel in Brooklyn.
Hello, Marcel in Brooklyn. Andrew. I love it. The other side of the world. You're very welcome. What are your thoughts, Marcel?
Emma as well. Love you, Emma.
I love you.
Hello, Emma.
I don't know who you are, but I love you.
Marcel loves you. Marcel's in Brooklyn.
I love Brooklyn. Can we talk about Brooklyn? I love Brooklyn.
You're just getting up in the morning, aren't you, at the moment? It's about 7 o'clock.
Yes, 7:13 here in the East. You guys, 12:13 Wednesday in London over there. How lovely.
No, thank you. So what do you think? What are your views, Marcel? What's the solution to the problem about too many criminals, too few jail cells to put them in?
Oh, here in the United States? Come on already. What is wrong with these people? So many crimes, so many arrested, so many locks, so many going to jail? Oh, this is outrageous. You better to get away from those police. Even those crimes and the law enforcement. This is not right. But you guys in the United Kingdom going on and around the world over there, as well as all those criminals affecting the issues, all of it saving our lives, this is not right. This is not right. This is a shocking move. This ain't working. This is not going to be working. We must protect all of our communities and our countries safe, and so much harm for all of the badges, the guns, and even the hats to protect our law enforcement. This is our job to keep away from those issues affecting drugs, all those marijuana stuff. This is dangerous. This is issues. This ain't issues. This is not right, Andrew. This is not right.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, thank you very much for sharing your very clear views. Send our love to the people in Brooklyn. That was Marcel from Brooklyn. Final word then on this, Emma. Give me your final thoughts. What do you reckon?
Okay, so a few days ago, the government in the UK have been discussing the issue of the young offenders prisons. But there's a couple of, I think a pilot one has been set up down in Kent. It costs a lot. You get young offenders in, you really give them a reason, you give them a career, you give them discipline, you give them training, you give them education. And you know what, Andrew? You prevent us from having lifelong criminals. You prevent them from being a burden on society, a misery to their own families and themselves for the rest of their lives. So I think put the money in early. You don't give people 20 chances. You don't give them 10, but you give them a chance. You give them a chance in life. Because when you come from a family of crime, when that's all you've seen and you're a young child, yes, you will grow up and you will offend, but give them a chance.
Give peace a chance. Absolutely. And prevention is always better than cure. So tackling those ills in society that Marcel so eloquently put. Richard, final word on you?
Well, it pains me to disagree with Andrew from Sussex, because East Sussex, especially the South Downs.
Paul, his name is. I'm from Sussex as well. Yeah, Paul it was.
Oh,
yes.
God, very sorry about
that. But it's good. It doesn't pain me to disagree at all. I want to encourage those different voices. So I'm glad we've come to a moment of disagreement. What did Paul get wrong?
I think that, he's talking about crime going up. He's talking about the problems with young people. I would actually kind of question that. So we are definitely seeing a rise in the number of crimes that get reported to the police, the number of crimes that the police write down. But when you do a different thing, when you survey people about how much crime is happening to them, which traditionally has been a much more accurate way of getting the number of crimes that are happening in the country, in the UK, it's called the British Crime Survey. That actually has shown that most crimes have been falling over the last few years. There's some very specific crimes like stealing from shops, shoplifting, which have been going up, but generally crime has been going down. We're just much more aware of it, and it's become much more of a political issue. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a different thing to we live in a more dangerous society. And as for young people, well, actually, I think we can be pretty optimistic, because the generation who are younger than me are doing much less drinking. They're taking far fewer drugs. I'm afraid to say that they're going out less and they're being less sociable, which is a real shame, and maybe it's a problem in itself. But as for committing crimes, they're probably less of a problem than my generation are.
No, brilliant. Emma, Richard, for now, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to be straight back after these important messages. You are listening to today's New Talk TNT with me, Andrew Eborn. These are the Muckrakers. We'll see you after these messages.
TNT's David Curtin.
It's good to have a small number of foreign students come to study, but when we've tripled that number over 20 to 25 years, bringing people in to study courses which aren't going to do them any good whatsoever, and it becomes essentially a big scam to get people into the country. They do a noddy course, then they have permanent leave to remain. They become an Uber driver or something for 5 years, and then they can get citizenship and a British passport. And a lot of the foreign students coming to UK universities have that aim in mind. They're happy to pay the vast fees to study things which aren't going to do them much good in terms of getting a degree, so that they can get British citizenship, and then they can bring their families over and so on by chain migration once they've got their degree, because they have the right to stay on a graduate visa. The whole thing is an absolute scam.
David Curtin on today's News Talk, TNT.
The Light is Britain's far-right conspiracy theory paper spreading hate and vicious lies. No, that's what the BBC say. The Light is the only national newspaper bringing you the real news and informed opinion on what's really going on today. You can subscribe, order copies, submit articles, and read back issues on our website, thelightpaper.co.uk, and see for yourself why the establishment are so worried about the uncensored truth getting out to people every month. The Light Paper. Not for right, just right so far. thelightpaper.co.uk.
When the world's endangered animals need help most, when their lives are at greatest risk, when they would otherwise be lost, the International Fund for Animal Welfare is there, taking action to rescue the animals we love, to protect them and their threatened natural habitats. But the danger to animals the world over is growing, and the need for your help has never been more urgent. On land, you'll help stop poachers from threatening and killing elephants and big cats for the illegal wildlife trade. In the oceans, you'll help rescue dolphins, whales, and seals from deadly hazards. And you'll help rescue, rehabilitate, and release vulnerable animals when disasters strike. Here at home and around the world, we can't do this work without you. See how you can help animals and people thrive together at joinifall.org.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. I had a 90% blockage in my main artery and a 75% blockage in the adjacent artery. I received 2 stents in my arteries, stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. Learn more about the American Heart Association's life-saving work at helpheart.org.
This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back. This is the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and glorious callers all the way around the world. We've had Paul from Sussex, we've had Marcel up nice and early in Brooklyn, and we do want to hear from you. I'm being spoilt today. In fact, I'm spoiling all of you because I've got the brilliant Emma Wolf with me, and also my new friend, Richard Power Saeed. How do you decide whether the power comes before the Saeed or the Saeed before the power? Who decided?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, Power is my mum's name, and Saeed is my dad's. So I suppose it's ladies first.
Oh, well done. It's all good stuff. We're talking about the heavy issues.
Fantastic surname. That is a very cool
Anything
surname.
with the Power, I think, and Saeed's a fantastic surname. Power is a brilliant surname as well. I think that should be Power Eborn. I love it. We'll do that. All part of the Power Rangers. We'll get it going. Do get in touch. We want to hear your views. People always say they've got no platform to speak. Well, you have. Don't grizzle on social media. Get in touch with us here. Let's talk about Michael Gove then. He's accused Gaza protesters of turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism. As you probably know, the UK's Community Secretary, Michael Gove, he's basically said they're turning this blind eye to lurid demonstrations of anti-Semitism. He said Jews are unable to be their authentic selves near the marches, and while many protesters are thoughtful, gentle, compassionate people, they are side by side with those who are promoting hate. That's what they say. So, are Gaza marches a hotbed of anti-Semitism? Let's start with you, Richard.
Hey there. So I think the short answer is that there may be some bad people on marches, but that's not particularly unusual. There are bad people everywhere. And as Michael Gove has actually admitted, the vast majority of people on these marches are very well-meaning. several of my Jewish friends go on these marches on a frequent basis. They're happening most weeks in London at the moment. I personally wouldn't, because although I'm extremely critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and his war crimes, I believe very deeply that it's a good thing and a right thing and a necessary thing for Israel to continue to exist. That doesn't mean that the way that the Jewish state was created in the 40s wasn't deeply unfair and unjust, but it's there, and it's the place where Jews can feel safe. And I think it's very important that we protect that. I think that any other option is unthinkable. So I disagree with a lot of things that people are saying on these marches, but to attempt to tar them with the brush of anti-Semitism, when, as I say, there are many Jews on these marches, is, I think, really deeply wrong. He's trying to say that, you know, he said, when he kind of got down into the detail of it, things like, Jews who are anti-Zionist can be on these marches, but Jews who are not anti-Zionist can't be. And you know, it's almost like he's saying that somebody who isn't Jewish, can tell Jews who's a real Jew and who isn't. I mean, I'm from a partly Jewish family, and my grandmother was a very committed Zionist. She lived in the kibbutzim and in Israel around the time of the Yom Kippur War, and she really handed that down to me, a belief in Israel. But she also handed down to me the very strong view that Palestinians deserve their statehood. And, you know, ultimately, you know, okay, there are big differences between the Palestinian and the Israeli experience, but both of these are communities, nations, who have been deprived of their safety because they've been deprived of their nation state at different times over their history. And they're not, and what the lesson of that is that people, when they're not safe, will, yes, potentially be a threat to the people around them, and they need to be given that safety of statehood.
Yeah, you talk about safety. Do you feel safe in London now?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a teenager, so that's about 20 years ago, a bit longer, you know, actually London was a lot more unsafe. You were much more likely to have, you know, some random person or gang walk up to you and stop you and demand your phone. And if you didn't hand it over to them, you'd get punched or something like that. That happened to me loads of my friends when I was a teenager. Doesn't really happen so much now. People do have their mobile phones snatched out of their hands when they're walking along the street by people on bikes. That's a particular kind of crime that is definitely more common these days. Shoplifting, we talked about earlier, that's more common. But generally, violent crime is really significantly down, and other forms of crime are down in London and across the country. It's just that we're talking about them more, and that's important.
Yeah, no, it's definitely important. Well, what are your views, Emma?
Well, I was going to say, just to the issue of feeling safe in London, because it's an interesting one. We hear so much about how dangerous London is, and I have been vocal about, you know, the failings of Sadiq Khan, the newly re-elected mayor of London, and the knife crime, the stabbings around, you know, well, specifically around East London, but also all over London, in fact, and all around the country, which seem to be going unchecked. But actually, as a Londoner born and bred, as someone who's lived here all their lives, I've never, and as a woman on her own, you know, often out and about on my own, I've never felt threatened. I've never been mugged. I've never been harassed, particularly, you know, maybe a bunch of lads shouting at you when I was a teenager or whatever. But I've never felt particularly unsafe in London. However, I have a 3-year-old son, and I do worry very much about how this will be in 10 years' time when he's a young lad, when he's a teenager, out and about on the streets of London. Because where I live in London, central London, but to the east, you know, every night you hear police helicopters hovering overhead. Every night you hear about stabbings and arrests and violence on the street. So it is a difficult time. In terms of what Michael Gove, do I have a minute to talk about Michael Gove's?
Yeah, you've always got as much time as you want. I make sure your voice is heard, Emma. I'd never stop you.
Lovely. I think Michael Gove and everything that Richard said about his family is absolutely fascinating, with that heritage. And like Richard, I have Jewish family. All the Wolfs on my side of the family were Jewish. Virginia and Leonard Woolf had their plans in place, Andrew. They had plans in place of what they were going to do, how they were going to commit suicide if Hitler invaded. Isn't that an amazing thing to think about? That people in the 40s were talking about what they would do in the 30s, sorry, late 30s, what they would do if Hitler invaded this country. It's absolutely chilling. But I think what Michael Gove was saying was it's a responsibility for everybody on those marches, on those pro-Palestinian marches. And of course, most of them are good people, peacefully protesting, concerned about the suffering of the vulnerable in Gaza. That's what he's talking about. But he's saying everybody on those marches has a responsibility to not accept placards or slogans or any kind of symbols of anti-Semitism. Never, ever to make Jews in our capital city who live here, Jews who've lived here all their lives, feel unwelcome in their own city or unsafe in their own, in their hometown. So that is a responsibility on everybody on those marches to not accept the minority, the tiny minority of anti-Semitic protesters.
Yeah, and you make a very good point, because people basically, the media and various others, they always report, well, there's anti-Semitism, it's risen horrendously, the streets are unsafe, and both of you actually saying, well, that the reports are a bit too exaggerated. What's interesting, I live right in the heart of London, just by Regent's Park, and we have the biggest mosque closest to me. We have the US ambassador's residence, we have the Israeli ambassador's residence. The BBC is just a 2-minute walk, which I do quite often, where the marches all starts. And what used to be a wonderful community, there is an element, I have to say, where people are scared, just to put the other side of it. And I think that is abhorrent. The people who are chanting basically what are sort of calls for a genocide, effectively, some of them. If the intention is there, and some of them don't know what they're saying, forgive them, they know not what they say. What's happening is those who live in fear, that's not right. A right to protest, a right to talk about peace and get jaw, not war is right, but making people live in fear has got to be wrong. So let me ask you both then, now, should protest on these things
Andrew,
like... Yeah.
But Andrew, and to that point, the notion that Jewish children can't wear symbols of being outwardly Jewish, that they can't get on the bus wearing their skull cap or wearing any kind of that is absolutely unacceptable. The notion that it's abhorrent. I mean, there's always been a lot of security outside Jewish schools in North London, but the fact that they have to have beefed up security, the fact that that you have to hide who you are, that has to be unacceptable for Jews in their hometown.
Well, it's interesting. You make an excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to very much admit that, like, in my anecdotal experience, that has got worse in kind of like the last 6 months, but also kind of long term. I went to a school with lots of Jewish kids, and I mean, not that they didn't experience anti-Semitism, but like the idea of sort of somebody saying something on the bus because they were wearing a skull cap or something like that, I mean, that was kind of unheard of. And I used to live in Stamford Hill, which is one of the very Jewish areas of North London. And they've definitely felt much more intimidated over the last few years. And you've seen that, as Emma says, in terms of more security being hired outside of those schools in particular, and also synagogues. And I'm glad to say that the government and the local government does support them with that. But a lot of the time it's privately paid for. That's working class Jewish communities paying for that security out of their own pockets a lot of the time. So, this is something very real. And when Jewish communities say we're not safe, we really do need to listen to that.
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, it was interesting hearing a particular member of parliament who has 2 children. He has a son who is in the military, doing military service in Israel, and he has a daughter who's in the heart of London, goes to a London school and will wear a Star of David. And basically, he's saying he's more worried about the reaction to his daughter in certain places than he is for his son. It is an extraordinary time. There's no right or proper place for anybody to live in fear. Absolutely express your views, but installing fear in anybody has got to be wrong. And I can't imagine anybody supporting that sort of side. Oh, tell me that. I mean, do you think that Michael Gove, you mentioned him earlier, is he the right person we should be giving advice on racism and anti-Semitism? Let's start with you, Emma.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, he's funny, Michael Gove. He has hobby horses about all sorts of different things. And yes, he's the communities secretary, but he doesn't seem to do much about sort of safety, community policing on our streets and things like that. So I'm just not really sure what his bag is. He pops up and does all sorts of things. I have mixed views on Michael Gove.
Richard, I think you have very strong views.
I do indeed. I think that Michael Gove has really consistently shown himself to not be a friend of minority ethnic communities. I think that somebody who has always come down on the side of people kind of, extolling hate speech and that kind of thing, that's been a really consistent theme of his career. And I find it very disturbing the way that he seems to have decided now to take up anti-Semitism as his as a particular theme. I think Jewish communities in our country, and like other minority ethnic communities, of course, want politicians who are not from their communities to be interested and engaged and talk about the problems that they're facing. But when they feel that those are being potentially politicized, they get really worried. And I think that one of the ways that Michael Gove politicizes it is by pitting, for instance, the interests of Jewish communities against the interests of Muslim communities. And I think that that is such a dangerous thing to do, to be dividing people against each other. You've really got to look for the common ground and look at the ways in which actually a lot of the time Muslims and Jews are facing threats from the same politicians. You think about the rise of the far right around Europe. Those are the people who are, in Hungary, for instance, in Slovakia. They're people who have really strong connections to Nazis, to neo-Nazis, who actually entered into power. Like, that's the kind of anti-Semitism that we really need to be worried about, because those are anti-Semites who have got the power to do something very dangerous. And those people hate Muslims too. So I think recognizing and emphasizing how our minority ethnic communities share interests in fighting against racism, that's something that we need to be emphasizing, not dividing people in the way that I think Michael Gove has.
Absolutely. And I think you need to look at that. Lots of people have been talking about a two-state solution. Now, Salman Rushdie's come out and he said, look, he's warned, if you like, the formation of an independent Palestine would mean the creation of a Taliban-like state that would become a client of Iran. He said that despite the long-standing support for the Palestinian state, he was concerned that if it were established now, it would be run by Hamas. Emma, briefly, do you agree with what Rushdie says?
Yeah, I think Rusty makes a really, really good point. I mean, it just highlights what he's saying is highlights what a threat Hamas are, and also how complex the situation is. Because we can call all we want for a free Palestinian state if that's what you support, but it's not that simple, because who would be in charge? Do we want to replace, the situation at the moment with basically giving Hamas the kind of power that Taliban have? And effectively, I think pro-Palestinian activists, it's all very well to call for what they're calling for, but they need to think it through and think about who would actually govern this state. Because what happens if you have Hamas gaining legitimate control, then we have all sorts of problems. And we've seen what's happened with the Taliban.
And it's always difficult, isn't it? Because you turn around and say, look, we want to give you democracy, but if we don't like who you elect, we might take steps. That's got to be quite difficult, doesn't it, Richard?
So I think the first thing to say is that Hamas are terrible in all sorts of ways, but they're not actually like the Taliban. They're very different. I mean, in Hamas-controlled institutions, there are women in very senior positions, that kind of thing. So I think we need to be a little bit careful about that. That's not praising Hamas. It's just talking about like what a Hamas-led Palestinian state would actually look like.
But just before you move on from that, though, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. Absolutely. So we've had problems saying that in the media.
Yeah. They committed evil, violent acts on October 7th, and that was not by any means the first time. I'm just trying to identify that we are talking about very different kinds of organizations, and I don't think Salman Rushdie would want us to be kind of oversimplifying that.
Sure, but just before we move on from that, you do recognise they are a terrorist organisation, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. It's incredibly important to understand that. Yes, when Hamas are in control of particular bits of Palestinian politics, of course that has awful repercussions for Palestinians and also for Israelis, indeed for the rest of the world and the rest of the region. I would point out, I think this is really important, 30 years ago, Palestinian politics was almost entirely secular. Women had really senior positions in the most important political parties and factions, and these parties and factions were committed to democracy rhetorically. Now, I'm not pretending that it wasn't really corrupt. It was. I'm not pretending there wasn't loads of sexism. There certainly was. But the point is that Palestinian politics was absolutely going, it seemed, in the right direction. What changed around 30 years ago? Well, I'll tell you, about 30 years ago, Benjamin Netanyahu stood up in the Knesset and said, we need to be using all of our intelligence and military capability to empower Hamas and the radicals in Palestinian politics, because that will weaken the current Palestinian Authority, and then they'll be weaker and we'll be stronger in our fight against them. Well, we can all see how that turned out, right? And, that's one of the things that Netanyahu and the right of Israeli politics have been really criticized in the Israeli media over the recent months, because actually October the 7th, whilst of course it's the moral responsibility of Hamas, the evils that were done there, we can see how Israeli political leaders, particularly on the right, have created the situation where that was what was going to happen, because it was Hamas who've got power in Palestinian politics. So that leads us with a question.
In simple terms, just to stop you there, Richard. In simple terms, then, is the response from Netanyahu, is that genocide or a reasonable retaliation for what happened on October the 7th?
Absolutely, the rhetoric from Netanyahu and from several of his ministers, and indeed from the president of Israel, has been totally genocidal. They have talked about wiping people away. They've described people as animals. They have said that all citizens, all Palestinian citizens and civilians are legitimate targets. That's unquestionably genocidal rhetoric. And the question is this, right? Is this war, is this approach by Israel towards Palestine, is it likely to empower the radicals and the terrorists within Palestinian politics, so that Palestinian and Israeli conflict between them grows ever stronger? Or is it likely to create peace? Well, I think we all know that what the answer to that is, right? Ultimately, at some point, Palestinians are going to have to be given some degree of independence. You can't stop it forever. And that's particularly true when US power in the region is diminishing all the time, right? So at some point that's going to happen. It would be far better if we started moving towards that now, rather than, I don't know, wait for another 15 years, 50 years of radicalization in Palestinian politics and then started moving towards a Palestinian state. That would be more scary.
Okay, Emma, let me just bring you in there very simply then before we go to another break. Genocide or a reasonable measured response to October the 7th?
Well, of course not. I mean, it's not measured. None of this is measured. It's a tragedy what's happening. My heart bleeds for everybody, every single vulnerable citizen on both sides of this horrific conflict. The problem is Netanyahu was very clear from the very beginning. He said he wanted to eliminate Hamas altogether. How do you do that? How do you eliminate an ideology? It's not just an organization. It's whack-a-mole. You destroy one bit, of the region, another cell pops up. The problem is so many innocent lives are being lost, so much suffering, so much humanitarian grief and starvation is going on right now. And I can't take sides on this, I'm afraid. I just want it to stop.
Okay, I'm with you on that one. You're listening to today's News Talk TNT with me, Andrew Eborn. This is the Muckrakers. We'll be back after these messages.
Hi. I'm your retirement fear. But don't be scared. You're still in pre-retirement.
Pre-retirement? Does that mean I have more time to plan?
Precisely. Here, this is pretirement.org.
Retirement savings options? Potential tax breaks?
Yep. Ooh.
Oh, I could build up savings for my side hustle. This isn't scary. I'm doing it.
You got this.
Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan.
The Kids Cancer Project funds vital research into childhood cancers. And you fund the Kids Cancer Project. Funding research means giving children back their lives. And who knows what kids with cancer could grow up to do? The Kids Cancer Project. Survival starts with science. Donate now.
The Kids Cancer Project.
The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
And we're back. Hello. We are back. Oh, welcome back. The joys of behind the scenes here at TNT as we adjust green screens. The glorious pictures behind me are not really glorious pictures. It's stuck here in Regent's Park, the glorious Regent's Park. But I am joined by the Power Wolf. I think this is what we should have. I love the idea of we've got the wonderful Emma Wolf and Richard Power Saeed, and we're unpacking today's problems. But we're not the only voices that we want to hear, apart from those in the gallery. We also want to hear from you, and this is how you can get in touch.
Our lines are open. From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Well, brilliant. There you go. Do get in touch. We love to hear your voices. So extremism czar, he's blasted the left's violent and intimidation and says that ministers must get to grips with a surge in violence, intimidation and incitement of hatred by extreme left groups. And Britain's counter-extremism czar has warned us he recommended curbs on environmental and Gaza projects. Lord Wolney, that's the chap, the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption. He accused authorities of bringing insufficient, robust measures with groups on the left. And in a report published yesterday, he said groups like Just Stop Oil, everybody's favourite, who make law-breaking a central part of their modus operandi, should face serious curbs on their fundraising and should be liable to legal action from disrupted businesses. Richard, I know you're a big fan of the environment and things like that. Are you a fan of Just Stop Oil?
I think Just Stop Oil are an expression of how rightly terrified people are of what's happening with climate change. But I think whether you agree with them or not, there are two things that I think most people watching this will be really very much believe in. That's freedom of speech and democracy. And I think those are two things which are incredibly under threat right now in our societies, whether you're on the right or the left. I think we can all see that. And so the right to protest, and yes, the right to disrupt sometimes, as long as you're not doing something violent, is incredibly important. I'm incredibly worried for our democracy when somebody like Lord Wolney is treated like a legitimate commentator, that he's been commissioned to write a government report on this. Lord Wolney is a lobbyist for exactly the oil companies and the weapons producers that have been targeted by Just Stop Oil and Palestinian Action, who are two of the groups that he targets in his report. So you've literally got the government paying a corporate lobbyist for weapons makers and oil companies. These are the people who profit from war, and they profit from prices going up during the Ukraine war. You know, you and I suffering from inflation. They're the ones who are making money from it. He works for them, and then the government's paid him to write a report that says you shouldn't be allowed to protest against them in the ways that people have been. That is the kind of thing that if it was happening in another country, we would say this was a basket case country. We would say this is sort of corruption and the UN needs to go in and sort it out. I'm so embarrassed for Britain that we have a government that allows this kind of thing to happen.
Well, we all support free speech. I mean, that's the very nature, it runs through all of our veins. But do you support, just be really clear on this, a yes or no, do you support the methods that Just Stop Oil are using?
I wouldn't do them myself, but I have a lot of sympathy for it.
Do you support them, yes or no? Do you support them?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of giving
yes or no. I mean, it's very
answer.
simple. Do you support the destroying of artwork, the interruption of major events, the interruption in theatres, stopping people going about their legitimate business? Do you support it, yes or no?
I sympathise with it. I'm not sure.
No, not sympathise. Do you support it? Because now's your opportunity. It's really simple. Now's your opportunity to turn around and say, we abhor We abhor what you're doing. We support your right for freedom of speech. But what you're doing, destroying property, destroying other people's rights and rights to a peaceful life, is wrong. This is your opportunity to say it's wrong.
Oh, no, I'm definitely not going to say that.
So you support what they do. Emma, let me come to you. What do you think?
I'm glad you finally came to me, Andrew. I actually very much disagree. I very much disagree with Richard on this. I think we're reaching a stage where we have to genuinely question now how much we're going to allow endless protests. Freedom of speech, of course. Freedom to demonstrate, yes. But with a measured kind of yes there from me. And I'm, slightly horrified to say this, but, look at the disruption, even for the pro-Palestinian protests every single weekend, costing the police millions and millions of pounds in the last 6 months. I think Just Stop Oil are very, very little support for them. Is there support for their cause? Of course there is. I am an environmentalist as much as anyone else. I live a far greener life than most of them do, flying around the world to their Caribbean holidays. But Just Stop Oil, so far, they've had this kind of mantle of left-wing, hippie, environmentalism. It's all nice. It's all kind. No, look at what they're doing. They're causing criminal damage. They're invading airport buildings. They are, as you say, smashing up priceless works of art. They are causing criminal damage. Most of all, they're stopping people from going about their lawful business, right? We need to crack down on this. It is not acceptable. Andrew, if you or I tried to glue ourselves to the pavement or break into airport hangars and, invade runways, we would be arrested, and rightly so. And I'm sorry, their cause is just. Of course, their cause is just. Everybody wants to save the planet. But A, some of the stuff they come up with is just completely crazy. And B, they are causing criminal damage. And this needs to be cracked down on. Once again, we're seeing two-tier policing, and it's not acceptable.
No, you're absolutely right. Richard, you've got a right to respond. What do you say?
They're getting arrested all the time. Loads of them are going to prison. What are you talking about? This is bonkers. I mean, we've even seen a situation where a Just Stop Oil protester was not allowed, was legally stopped by a judge from telling jurors what their rights were, that they had the right not to convict somebody and go against a judge's advice, which is the law of the land and has been for several hundred years. Like, that's how aggressively they are being cracked down on already. And the idea that we want them to be more cracked down upon is absolutely bonkers. Look, it's when big social change happens, and I think we need some pretty big social change in this country, it's very often because a bunch of people said, yeah, we're going to cause trouble, and yeah, it's going to annoy other people, but it's really important. Women getting the vote because of the suffragettes, international pressure being put on the racist South African apartheid government, gay rights because of gay liberation protests. All of these things were treated in exactly the way that Just Stop Oil protesters are treated now. People say, oh, well, maybe we sympathize with your cause, but you shouldn't be causing any trouble. Well, no, you have to cause trouble if you're going to achieve change. And these people are achieving, I hope, some absolutely desperately needed change.
Hang on a minute. They are going to events and chucking orange powder around Chelsea Flower Show. They are stopping people, working Londoners, and I'm going to use London as an example, and I'm sorry to everyone else around the world, but they're stopping Londoners like taxi drivers, like cleaners, for us just from moving around the city and earning a wage. These are not the people. They are stopping families, working class, hardworking families, from taking a once a year, summer holiday in Spain, gluing themselves to the runways, disrupting airports. These are not the targets they should be going after. Yes, of course, I agree with their cause. Of course, we need to stop, damaging oil and gas and all of that kind of thing. And we need to address the issue of climate change. But the idea that these overprivileged young kids who actually live very, very privileged lives are achieving anything with their protests in central London is, I'm afraid, is absolute nonsense.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I'll tell you where I am on this. I think we all support the fundamental points about the right to protest, about highlighting certain areas. People might question some of the facts and figures, which we're always going to try and do here. I, however, go further and think that they actually alienate people from their cause as a result of the disruption. What do you say to that, Richard?
I'd say that when Just Stop Oil and rather when Extinction Rebellion started their main protests a couple of years ago, then concern about climate change massively increased. All of the polling showed it. So I'd say you're wrong on that one, and the numbers demonstrate
it. So let me be clear on this beforehand. One thing, Richard, just to be clear, just as you said, you support what they do. One quick yes or no answer.
No, I didn't say that. Anyway,
do you condone criminal damage?
Do I condone criminal damage? As in all ways? No. Do I think that there are times when criminal damage is an understandable and legitimate tool of, the anti-apartheid protests, the suffragettes protests, and anti-climate change protests? Yes.
What criminal damage do you condone?
No, Richard, Andrew, I have to come in. How on earth can Richard even defend two old ladies attacking the Magna Carta in a glass case in one of our national heritage institutions to highlight the cause of Just Stop Oil? The two are completely unrelated. That is, they didn't manage to because they only had a little hammer and a chisel. That is totally indefensible, and it is destructive, and it is pointless and stupid. You highlight your cause by educating people, by organizing peaceful protests or whatever it is. You don't go into the National Gallery and start attacking artworks in a glass case. That's ludicrous.
A National Gallery? Oh, well, that is literally what one of the greatest suffragettes of the movement did. She went in and she ripped the Velasquez.
So to be clear on this, just to be clear on this, and just a yes or no answer, you support the damage to the Magna Carta. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm very against that. As a historian, I'm really big on protecting the Magna Carta.
So what damage do you support? What crimes can be committed?
What about spray painting our lovely buildings along Whitehall, along the Victorian Bank?
Is that okay? Buildings in Whitehall.
I don't know about that because I'm not aware of that. What I can tell you about with Just Stop Oil protests that get almost consistently ignored is when they go and pour paint outside of the massive corporate funders of the people who are poisoning our kids' futures, when they go and try to close down the power producers who are poisoning our children's future. These things, of course, get completely ignored in the media. That, I think, is really understandable, and there's a lot of legitimacy to it.
And just be very careful on this. Yes, go for it, Emma. Let me just do one warning. Can I do one warning, first of all? Is that inciting somebody to commit a criminal offence is an offence in and of itself. We'll come back to you on that. Emma, what's the point?
As environmentalists, you know what I would love to see Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion do? I would love to see them out collecting litter, looking after animals, talking to children about how we can recycle and be greener. I would love to see them, stopping drivers and asking them if they'd considered, sharing cars or cycling or taking public transport. There are genuinely so many environmentally friendly things that we can all do in our public spaces, in our environment, to clean it up.
No, absolutely. I have to say, you're absolutely right, Richard. I do find it shocking that you would actually encourage people to commit crime.
Well, as you pointed out, one should never encourage people to commit crime. Then you would be committing a crime yourself. I'm saying that I think there's moral and political legitimacy to disrupting the operations of people who are poisoning our children's future. I think that if you ask which one matters more, the huge damage to human civilization that's being done by bad harvests, by the perhaps billions of people who may need to leave their homes over the next century because of climate change, the extreme weather that kills old people in hot summers and hot winters, which results in higher infant mortality, especially in developing countries. you telling me that that doesn't matter far more than the criminal damage that we're talking about here?
I tell you, but to be really clear on that, let me be really clear on this. I've listened to you. Let me be really clear. The cause is a worthy cause for the reasons that you mentioned. People should look at that. The consequences of what they're doing and going about their cause is actually alienating people. You're one of the very few people, other than the just up oil people we give a platform to, who actually speak and advocate criminal damage and working on that sort of basis. So you're alienating people from your cause. So you're not even getting the results. And actually, people are now saying that they should pay not just for the criminal damage, but for the policing and so on and so forth, that is extra policing that's needed. What are your views on that, Emma?
Absolutely, I think they should. You cannot we can't keep saying you have the freedom of speech, freedom, right to protest. Of course you do. You can go and protest online, start up a petition. There are many things you can do. I would love to see their activism be rooted in their beliefs rather than this random publicity seeking, willful damage and interruption to other people's lives.
Absolutely. We have to, sadly, we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. We will get you back because I love it. I never like to say we've run out of time, but we have to on this particular occasion. I will always say it's freedom of speech, but it's not freedom from consequences. You've been watching The Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, my wonderful guest, Emma Wolf. I really look forward to joining you again next time. Richard Parasite, thank you very much. But I'm so glad we managed to find something we disagreed on at the end as well, which is not too difficult. Do let us know your views. Your views are really important. It's Andrew Eborn here from The Muckrakers. Join me again tomorrow, same time, same place, right here on Talk Now.